Good. All right, so it's 2 o'clock here in Bangkok, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's Stats Café on statistical business registers. My name is Rika Hansen, and I oversee ESCAP's work on economic and environment statistics. Now, today's topic, statistical business registers, it's really a foundational piece of statistical infrastructure. It's a register that gives us data on enterprises. It can be used directly for producing statistics and can certainly also be used to plan and design business surveys. Improving statistical business registers is a priority for many national statistical offices in Asia and the Pacific. And I want to thank the steering group for the regional program we have here in Asia and the Pacific for prioritizing statistical business registers in their program, because that is really the reason that today's Stats Café on SBRs happens. And a special thank to one of the members of that steering group, the Asian Development Bank, for co-organizing the Stats Café together with ESCAP today. So during this session, we'll hear something about why SBRs are important, what they can be used for. We'll get some overview of what kind of support is available. We'll hear examples of developing statistical business registers, some of the related challenges and lessons. And I hope we'll have some time to discuss collaboration opportunities going forward. And it's we are joined today by a very nice group of experts who will take the lead and take us through, we have experts from Australia, from Laos, from Norway, from the Asian Development Bank, and from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Before introducing our first speaker, let me just put a few logistical notes here. All of you, if you are not speaking, please do keep your microphones on mute so that we can all hear each other. And I also want to encourage everyone to please use the chat function of today very, very actively. Use the chat function for commenting, for asking questions. You can do that throughout the session, and I'll do my best to pick up your inputs as we go along. And a strong encouragement for you to be active. Your inputs and questions are really what will ensure that what our resource persons speak about is exactly what you would like to hear about. So don't be shy. We have a series of presentations that are rather different, so I will open up the floor for a few questions after each presenter, and then at the end we should still have around 20 minutes for an open Q&A where our individual presenters will sort of turn panel. With that, I think we are ready to start. It's great to see nice faces here on the screen. And our first presenter is from UNECE, the Economic Commission for Europe. His name is Carsten Paulsen, and Carsten worked in Statistics Denmark on social and economic statistics during 1988 to 2005, so that's a whole lot of years. And then since 2005, Carsten has been the Chief of Economic Statistics Section at UNECE. And Carsten also functions as an external lecturer in economics and statistics at Copenhagen University in Denmark. So Carsten, you have the floor to take us through why we need SBRs and also give an overview of some of the resources UNECE makes available. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you for the invitation to attend this meeting, this cafe. I will try to share my screen. Does it work?
Yes, we can see it, your slides, and we can hear you.
Good. So I understand, Rikke, I have about 10 minutes.
It's already started.
Yes, you have 10 minutes, Carsten.
Yeah, so let's move ahead. So, yeah, as you said, Rikke, why do we need a business register? Why do we need to put resources and money in it? I'll talk a little bit about this and about for what purposes we can use the business registers, and then do a little bit more, go into a little bit more details about data sources, in particular administrative data. I don't know how much this is used in your region, but it's certainly a potential for the future. And dissemination, meaning producing statistics directly based on the business register. I will also say a few words about this and round up with very few words about the developing of the business registers. So let's go on. Why we need a good business register? There's plenty of good reasons for this. As you said also in your introduction, it's a kind of infrastructure. It's a data infrastructure that it provides. But of course, in statistics, we should always try to look at it at the beginning from the user's perspective. Why are we here? This is to produce information, statistical information for the users. And there is a lot of demand for high quality statistics and also for more detailed statistics in almost all countries, I think. There's also a need for and a demand for more timely statistics. There's also a movement towards, a principle that you say that you could only collect the same information once. And in a lot of societies, you have different data sources, you have different registers. So you already have collected a lot of information. It's just not collected by the statistical office, but it is somewhere out there. And how do we take advantage of all this data that already has been collected? There's also a need for more efficient and integrated production processes for economic statistics, and the business registers can help with that. So you may say that it can be a spline or it can be the backbone in the production of economic statistics if you have a very good business registers. And it's also it's a prerequisite, I would say, if you want to really move forward and modernize the way that you produce your economic statistics. Unfortunately, of course, it doesn't pay off immediately. It does take a lot of time to develop a good business register, also because you need to reach out to other institutions, to other organizations when you do it. And it does take time and it requires resources. So therefore, sometimes it's not so easy to convince your management or your top management on why they should give priority to put resources into business registers. It's obviously, if you have many other areas, subject areas, if you have your CPI or PPI or your national account, and you can maybe say, okay, if we put more resources in this, we will have much better national account next year, or we will have a better price next year. But business registers, by experience, it just takes longer time. So this is one reason why it's sometimes more difficult to have resources allocated, because it is a kind of an intermediate system. You have this infrastructure. In most countries, this is just for illustration. It's built up in this, that you have your sources there. It can be many different, and then you have you collect them in this huge database, which usually is called the live register. And based on this, you can have different kinds of extraction or snapshots or frozen frames, whatever you call it, and then you use this for all your service-based economic statistics when you draw your samples and so on and so forth. It can be used for many different purposes. It's also good for international to enhance international cooperation and as information source and so on and so forth. This is just a listing. About the modernization of statistical production and services. Yeah, it's about integrating the statistical production, coordinating and linking the units from different sources, so it makes sense. So you get a coherent system of statistical units, making use of better administrative registers, combining data from traditional sources, surveys, with data from administrative registers, which is a huge issue. Also providing data warehouse, offering different types of data access to users, which you have started to do in certain countries. So it's one issue to stress here also that is that in addition to this, to the issue about having an integrated and an efficient system for producing the economic statistics, it's also important with a good business register, with a very broad coverage, in order to be able to produce coherent economic statistics, which is consistent or as consistent as possible across different domains of statistics, so that many different parts of statistics are using business registers in their production when they do their sample, or when they do adjustment of data, scaling up or scaling down and so on. And very often there are issues there, and the business registers can help with sorting this out, and so you have a more coherent system of economic statistics. So data sources. It's very different from country to country, of course, but in general you could distinguish between at least 4 different types of data sources. So administrative data, you have survey data or feedback from surveys. You can have statistical registers, which means, for example, your population statistics. If you have some kind of a key or identifier in your population register that you can link to information you have in your business register, or it can be in other registers, statistical registers, your social register, or whatever. And you can link this to the units you have in your business registers. Then this is a smart way to get more information into your business registers. And in principle, you can use all other kinds of data sources. I mean, telephone stuff, stuff from telephone records, or from private market companies. And then on the other hand, on the right-hand side here, you have the units that you would usually find in your business register. So you have your legal units, or which are also sometimes called the administrative units. And then you have your establishment and enterprises, and maybe also enterprise groups in your business registers. But this is very country specific. I would like to say a bit more about administrative data, because there's a lot of potential in utilizing these types of data. So the most important administrative data sources are probably the value-added tax data, social security tax data, personal income tax data, corporate tax data, of course. And you also, in some countries, will have administrative business registers, that meaning that you have registers. They are not for statistical purposes, they are for administrative or legal purposes. where you have to register if you want to establish a business. So these are the most common ones. It's interesting that some countries are very advanced in using business registers. You can get all kinds, depending on your registers, of course, the administrative registers, you can get all kinds of information out from these registers, so about legal status, names and addresses, of course. If you are more advanced, you can also link units in your business registers with more detailed information from some of the administrative registers. If from your tax, maybe your tax registers, you will have turnover data or number of employed persons or whatever from the different businesses, then you can use the register to include this in your business register, so you don't need to make a survey about it.
Carsten,
yes,
you have 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm moving ahead. Of course, it's not completely paradise on earth with business using administrative register. It takes time, but it pays off in the end. There are also some problems with it. I listed some of them on this slide. That sometimes you don't find this unique identifier that you can use to link the information you have in the different administrative registers with the information you have in your business register. But some countries, for example, I think also some maybe in Norway, but certainly some of the Nordic countries, like in the Netherlands and so on, so today they update their business registers completely based on administrative data. So it means that the statistical office, it does not use resources on sending out surveys to a lot of respondents. They populated the business registers only based on administrative data, and this is very, very efficient. But it has taken a lot of time to come there with constant negotiation with the owners of the administrative data and so on and so forth. So this is a big challenge, but at the end it pays off.
Can you wrap up, Carsten?
What?
Please wrap up.
Yes. So legal issues, blah blah blah. More information. UNE, we have a very good guidelines for statistical business registers from 2015, which gives a lot of practical advice. It's developed by business registers experts from a number of countries. And then we have a guideline on the use of the statistical business register for business demography and entrepreneurship statistics. And just 2 words more, Rikke, I would like to add that when you develop your business register, it is very important to think the whole process through, to think it through before. If you first come up with something, you think, oh, this is nice, we can have a nice business register next year. Then maybe after it shows up that, okay, but if you want to produce some of this nice business demography or entrepreneurship statistics, then you will suddenly discover that, oh, you cannot do that based on your register. And then it will take another 2 or 3 years to do that. So it's important then when you finally decide to develop a business register that you think everything through, start from the end. What is the need for statistics at the users, from the user's perspective, and then see, okay, then what kind of information, what structure should be in the business registers. And last point, there's a lot, you will need to allocate a lot of time for governance and organizational issues, also in negotiation with owners of administrative data and so on and so forth. Thank you, Rikke.
Thank you so much, Carsten. And just responding to a comment that came in from Ali on sharing of the presentations and papers from this session, and we will share all of it. It will be available on ESCAP's website for the Stats Cafés, and my colleague Ing will share that link with you towards the end of the session. So Carsten, there was a question coming in from Tracy Wilkinson in Stats New Zealand. And this is in relation to one of the things you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation and also repeated at the end, namely that statistical business registers requires long-term planning. It requires resources. It's not a quick fix. And Tracy asks, are you aware of any particular techniques that's been applied for persuading senior leadership to invest in SBRs?
Yes, thank you. Very, very good questions. I wish I had the answers, but to start with the last issue, no, I'm not aware of any particular good trick. Only you need to have some convincing argument, but of course it is in competition with all the statistics from the substantive areas, where maybe it's sometimes more easy to get resources, both if you are successful, but also sometimes if you are not successful. I mean, it often happens in statistical office that if you have mistakes in your statistics, then the management say, okay, maybe you need some, or you can go to your management and say, look, we need some more resources. But I say at least there are some, but you can find some good arguments in this guidelines on statistical business registers from 2015, which is available on the website. And by the way, also afterwards was agreed globally by the UN Statistical Commission in New York. There is a chapter there which is devoted solely to the development of the statistical business register, and this is very useful, and it gives some hints also there.
Okay, thank you so much, Carsten. And while you've been speaking, your colleague Steve has been sharing the link to the resources you've just mentioned. So thanks to Stephen for that. And we also have a question coming in from Salika in Laos, but I'm going to pick that up a little bit later. So now I'd like to move to our next presenter. So thank you so much, Carsten. We move from Switzerland to Norway and to our next presenter, Anne Abelset, who is an IT specialist working at Statistics Norway in the Department of International Cooperation. Anne has worked there for 15 years and has, during that period, also spent some 4 years in Albania and Kyrgyzstan. She's primarily been working on statistical business registers and their developments in partner institutions. And based on the experiences there, she saw that there were just repeated requests for assistance to develop SBRs. So Anne took the initiative to commission the development of a reusable or generic SBR system, and that is called StatBus. And Anne will give us an introduction to that system. So welcome to you, Anne. Thank you for being with us today. And please do go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Rikke, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very thrilled to be here. So let me try to share my presentation. So is this okay?
Yes, we see it. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Okay. So Rikke summed very much up what I was going to say about this this screen. Only thing is there is a link here. I'm sorry to say that doesn't work yet. We were going to publish on Friday to have it ready for this meeting, but we failed. So it will be ready in a couple of days, I hope. So check in later. Anyway, so what is the Statbus? As Rike said, it's a statistical business register that is generic and reusable. We decided to go for an open source solution so that you can download it and, in theory, install it yourself. It's not that easy, as Carsten mentioned. It's not that easy to start with a business register, statistical business register. It's a lot more than just the software, and also the software being a client-server solution. It's complicated. Anyway, we designed it for reusability and flexibility. Like Ulrike said, I've been working internationally for 15 years, and my very first assignment abroad was in Eritrea. It was to make a business register, and starting from scratch in other countries. I've been working on it in Malawi, in Moldova, and more recently, after starting this Statbus project, working on it in 4 or 5 different African countries, and also Kyrgyzstan, and coming up Ukraine. So yeah, it is a lot of demand for it, and it's, yeah, as I said, a client-server solution. It has a web interface and uses all of the standard software libraries and frameworks. And you can choose what database under. It should be possible to run on both IIS and Apache, but we never tried the Apache, so I wouldn't recommend that yet. Anyway, yeah, the background, like I said, it's a high demand. I think more or less all of the countries we work in Statistics Norway, they sooner or later want a business register. And starting from scratch every time doesn't really make sense. But I also want to stress the importance of the international standards for the business register that was established first by African Development Bank with their guidelines, but also, and maybe even more so, the guidelines of the statistical business register that Carsten was talking about. Having these 2 publications is basically what I see as an international standard for business registers. So when these 2 publications were released, it kind of made sense to make a generic version of the software. Until then, it was no standards. Now it is. So that's why we started doing it. Okay, so the objectives of the business register. Of course, yeah, Carsten mentioned a lot about this too, is providing survey frames, producing statistics, inputs to national accounts, manage the response burden. As Carsten said, in Norway, we hardly ever survey businesses anymore. We get it all from administrative sources and into our business registers. So there is a lot of good use of the business registers. So about the Statbus, what are the units in there? As you may know, this is stolen from some UNECE document. I think this picture is you have this administrative world where very often tax authorities or license office agency or something register units, economic units. Mostly they register legal units. Sometimes they also register local units and enterprise groups. But in our statistical world, we don't want necessarily exactly these units. We want to create statistics on enterprises. And enterprises might be just a legal unit, or it might be a combination of legal units that creates kind of a unit that we create for statistics. We have kind of activity units we have local kind of activity units or establishment. So this is why basically it's not that easy to just use a the administrative register directly. It needs to be put into a statistical business register. So according to the AFDB guideline, you can be ambitious, more or less ambitious, when it comes to the register, what to put into it. According to AFDB, the minimal version should be that you have enterprises in it. Most normal is to say just that the enterprise equals a legal unit, same as you get from the tax authority. And this is also how we've been working in Norway until just a few years ago. So that's totally okay. Second, you should have establishments or that is the legal unit either broken down to local unit level or activity at local unit level, which is LCAU, local kind of activity units. Also, enterprise groups, that is not very common yet, but it should be in the statistical business register and taken into use as the data becomes more available. And then, other kinds of unit can be taken into use as data access improves. Okay, so this is basically the minimal version of a business register. So I want to show you what are the possible stages of the Statbus. So imagine first I am establishing a coffee shop. The first thing I do is to go to the tax authority to register. Now I have a legal unit, but I have no activity yet. I just have a legal unit without anything else. Then I establish my coffee shop location. So now I have a local unit and I have an activity. So basically this here is my LCAU. Here is a local unit and here is a legal unit. And then my coffee shop is successful. So, but it's hard to get coffee for some reason. So I buy a plantation to grow coffee, my own coffee. So now I have 2 local units and I have 2 local kind of activity units. And that's that. So, but at this plantation, I also grow other crops. So now I have 3 local kind of activity units, only 2 local units still. Okay, then I basically still very successful. So I open another coffee shop in Mombasa with its activity. And with all of these locations, it's getting hard to keep track. So I established kind of an administrative legal unit, Priscilla's Properties, to handle my employees and my locations and everything. So at the moment I have 2 legal units, and you know that Priscilla Properties doesn't really contribute to the economy in the country. It's basically just a part of Elvis Coffee Shop. It's they are kind of dealing economically within each other. So that's why we now have an enterprise, which is what we want to make the statistics based on, because these are basically just internally dealing. And also, this activity here is not really a local kind of activity unit, because this is only ancillary. This is just a helping unit to the coffee shop. Okay, so still very, very successful. I will go international and open my coffee shop in France, in Paris. Of course, legal units or businesses in France has nothing to do within my Kenyan register. So this is not of interest to the register. But the enterprise group, Elvis International is, of course, very important to the register, because this is a national big business. So basically, all of these steps that I mentioned, showed you here, all of these are possible in this business register status. So and to see it all in statistical business register terminology, we have it here. We have, or basically here. Yeah, we have local kinds of activity units. We have local units. We have, yeah, as I said, this is ancillary. We have kind of activity units. We have enterprise and enterprise groups. Okay, so the design is basically to make it as flexible as possible and take into use whatever data we have today and be able to expand it as more data flows into the statistical office. Okay.
And you have 2 minutes left.
Oh no. Okay, so I'll go quick. The contents of the units is what you expect: the identification, the biographic, the stratification, and the economic. The functionality is basically everything you need to do to maintain the register. But I said, this is important. Is a generic reusable business register, does it fit everybody? We agreed when we designed it that it should not be possible to add variables. Basically, we took the UNECE guidelines and said, this is what a statistical register should be. It should not be possible to add or subtract from it. But of course, so basically, if you suddenly want to have values on export or whatever values, you can't add it. But of course, you can have satellite register with the additional information. And yeah, you can activate and deactivate features and quality measures. You of course, have all its country-specific contents. And you can add quality criteria as needed. So basically, if you have, for instance, a ID number with control digits on the end, you can add logic to check that this is fulfilled. And we can have up to 3 languages. Currently, it's in Russian, Kyrgyz, and English, as we have developed it together with the Kyrgyz Statistical Office. But this can be changed as we want to. Okay, so the whole idea was to make it as flexible as possible and to be able to configure everything. Then what is the main challenges implementing a system? I think Carsten said it very good there. The lack of administrative sources. Given that you have administrative sources, getting the data from these sources is also very hard. And very important, lack of a national ID. I have one country I'm working, we have 7 different administrative sources and no ID. I have no idea how to connect the data. There is often very bad quality data, lack of data. And then, as also Carsten said, it's a lot of work to establish a business register. And yeah, very often we have not enough human resources for it. So I'm going to be quick. Okay, so basically, here is a schematic overview. The sources, and you do the data checking. The pink boxes are where we have people working on a daily basis. It goes into the SBR, and then you draw samples, you create statistics, you frames and management of units, etc. So and then you get the surveys or the statistics. The point of showing this foil is basically that I want to stress the pink boxes. This is the reality. It's so much more work than you expect. Okay, final slide. Our future plans for the status. Yeah, set up a demo website. The link I shared in the beginning is just, it's not a demo yet. Yeah, and it says was released last week, didn't quite manage. Anyway, and we're going to complete the projects we have in existing partner countries. As I said, Kyrgyzstan was the country that we developed this system together with. I'm going back there in September to finalize the whole thing. I also work now on Kenya, and upcoming is Uganda and Ukraine. And in the longer run, Ghana and yeah, Sudan, I think. Anyway, we have a lot of demand for this. Yeah. But we want to establish, or have already established, a cooperation with African Union and Statistics Sweden and partly Statistics Denmark. To basically, we want a typical open source community where we have discussions, we help each other, and all of these things. So this is very important. And we finally started planning a version 2.0, where we will add some more variables and develop some more functionality. So that's the plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for an interesting presentation, and apologies for having to rush you a bit here. And there's two questions coming in here for you. And we have Keochetra from Cambodia asking how to handle informal economic units in StatBus. And we have a question from Cecilia Tinonin asking whether it's possible to disaggregate the owners of units by sex in StatBus.
Thank you. The question on informal units is very interesting. At least the African development the African guideline says you should have informal units in the register, but they don't really say how to keep them updated. And why would you, if you add them, then basically you have a dead register, because unless you update it, it's not really a register. So I was just discussing with Kenya about this, and they didn't want informal units because of this. It's no way you can update it, and we don't really know that much about the informal units. Totally different in Ghana. There they think they claim that, was it around 80% of their service economy is informal. So they think it's a very important part of the economy of the country. So they insist on adding it. We haven't quite found out how to deal with it yet, but I believe basically that we maybe should mark some of the units as informal and then keep them basically more like a list of businesses that is updated every census or something like that. But yeah, it's a very good question. As for the second question, the disaggregation by sex, not this, in this version, because when we made the requirement specification, gender statistics was not that big of a deal as it has become the last 3-4 years. So this is when I said on my final slide, I said add some variables. The disaggregation on sex is for sure something we will add in the next version. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Anne. And the questions are rolling here as you speak. I will have to keep these for later, but there is one person who's raised his hand, and that's Mark Kapchis from Rostad. Mark, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I would like, thank you. I would like just to thank Anne for this very interesting presentation. And there were very interesting slides with the examples about the coffee shop and the different types of units in the register. I would like just to ask you to go back to the slide. I would like to save it for...
Okay, well, Mark, we will share all the presentations after this session.
Okay, thank you.
So you will have access. And also we can all have a chance to go through the excellent slides on our own time as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks again, Anne. And let's move on to our next speaker. And we've now heard both from Carsten and Anne some of the challenges with implementing and putting in place statistical business registers. And the next presentation will take us a little bit more into some of the practical challenges with developing a statistical business register. And our speaker is Michael Biddington, a good friend of ESCAP Statistics. Michael is a statistician in the Australian Bureau of Statistics, but not so long ago he spent 3.5 years here in Bangkok in ESCAP and was part of the team implementing technical assistance as part of the regional program on economic statistics. And Michael's primary expertise and experience both at ABS and at ESCAP is in statistical business registers. And Michael has a master's in economics from the University of Melbourne. So it's great to have you with us here today, Michael. Please take it away.
Thank you, Rikke. Can everyone see the slides?
Yeah, we can see them. Thanks.
Okay, and as a former one of Rikke's employees, I know what happens if I don't keep to my 10 minutes, so I promise everyone that I will be on time. As per the lovely introduction, my name is Michael Biddington. I'm a statistician from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, but formerly of the UN, and I'm just here to talk about a project that I worked with Myanmar, with the Central Statistics Organization in developing a statistical business register. Sorry. There we go. Just a quick history of the project, or really from a Myanmar perspective. The CSO has developed a statistical business register. It was officially launched in 2019. Its backbone, or the core of the system, is the Asian Development Bank's generic SBR, of course, which has been highly tailored by the ADB team to meet Myanmar's requirements, but I'm sure Albert will present that in great detail after me. ESCAP's primary role was supporting the development of the team processes, and it was used for the first time for economic surveys in 2020, which was we were pretty proud of. Just to give you a history of how it all really began, a bit more timeline over detail, is the project began in 2016 after a business survey was conducted in Myanmar, and all the survey frames available were of such poor quality that the results from this survey were inaccurate, and that it was also very expensive. Because the SBR, because the only available survey sources were inaccurate, they thought that 40% of businesses were a manufacturing sector, which is not very accurate if you've looked at an economic census from any country in the region. As such, the CSO and the UNDP investigated options for what could be the basis for a statistical business register, and identified that local government, or townships as they call them, were the best possible source of information because they registered businesses annually to collect fees and taxes, and that was the best available source, or really the only available source with proper coverage. In 2017, they made an attempt, the CSO made an attempt to request information from all 330 townships in Myanmar using a standard Excel template. It was an impressive effort, but it didn't go great, especially compared to what was later achieved. So between 2017 to 2019, ESCAP, the CSO, and the Asian Development Bank, we all collaborated together to build the CSO SBR team, the CSO SBR, and implement its processes. And this accumulated in the launch of the CSO SBR in 2019, the first use of surveys in 2020 with the Myanmar Business Environmental Index, which you could Google and find all about, and the load of the new data from the new collection processes that we'd engineered in 2020 as well. Now, I could talk about all those trips, missions, and what we did with the team. I'm pleased to see one or two members of the team actually have joined this chat, which is very nice. Hello, Pupia. But that would take about 4 hours, and Rikke would be very upset. So I'm just going to discuss the single most important lesson I learned which I think is a trip which is applicable to other places as well, which is you really, really must invest in engaging with and understanding your data providers. I really think it's underappreciated how important it is, and the level of effort you really need to go to for this to work properly. And when I mean engage, I mean really establish proper mutual understanding. You need to understand their processes and purposes of their administrative data as much as they understand, and they also need to understand what you're doing. The photo you can see here is a photo taken from a workshop we conducted in Yangon. We had representatives from each state and region from local governments, and they presented on how their administrative processes worked, how they collected the data, how it was stored and processed. And we presented on how the CSO SBR worked, why it was being collected. And it was really just a fantastic workshop. Both sides learnt so much from each other. I mean, a lot of work went into preparing, but it was really fantastic. And because of this establishing a mutual understanding, the data providers, the local townships, the local governments were able to solve a lot of the problems we had with the initial collection. They were able to answer questions we didn't even know to ask. Most notable of all of this was that we were missing a key part of the Myanmar economy because businesses based in markets in Myanmar did not need to register for a business license. And because we had only been asking about licensed businesses, they had not known to provide this information to us and didn't understand that we'd be interested in them until we had this meeting. From this engagement, which wasn't just this workshop, it was more holistic, but that was really the critical one. A lot of changes was made to that initial process conducted in 2017. We changed the timing of the collection to better suit their requirements, their needs, and also get the data as fresh as possible. So right after the collection was complete for the year, but also when they had the ability to respond to us and at the time and had the free staff available. We updated the template and the language used in the template to make it more suitable for the intended audience, to use more common language that actually is relevant to these people as opposed to more statistical comment, no more NACE, ISIC, MSIC, just business descriptions, these sort of things. We also, and this was really, workshopped out, is we removed and changed some of the questions. One just example is there was a question regarding the year of registration. Now, the reason we wanted to know it was the main reason was we needed to know, was it a new or continuing business? But another reason was we would have liked to know how old it was. But the real important reason we needed to know was was it a new business or was it continuing from previous years? And speaking to these local governments, the few that had populated it told us that they had to then go check every single year's worth of registration of data to identify when it was first registered, which was just an insane amount of work when you consider that most of these local governments maintained paper records, not computer records. So it wasn't just a data field they could pull out. And so when we changed it to just from year of operation, first operation, to is it a new or a continuing business from last year, all they had to check was the previous year's registrations, which was a much quicker and easier task. We also did things like providing examples from the template. So just you could see a correctly populated template with good and bad examples, and just an explanatory document explaining what the purpose of this collection was, because we only had 15, 18 local governments present out of the 330 in Myanmar. So while we were able to establish a great rapport with these 18, there was many people who weren't there, that their only real engagement with us would be this template, this documentation, this request. And of course, we added the request to ask for the new types of businesses. Sorry. And just to show you some of the results, I mean, I could again talk about hours, but this is just some headline figures. The previous request identified 227,000 businesses. The updated request identified 477,000, of which 201,000 of these businesses were the market-based. So we had a much more representative sample of businesses in Myanmar, and it was also much more aligned with what you'd expect given population for particular areas. A key issue we'd had with the previous collection was a lack of sizing variables, either the number of employees for a business, the capital being invested, or what we say is license fee, which is the annual tax paid by the business. And it's sort of a proxy for business size, because the larger you are, the more you pay. And we were able to prove that by looking at businesses that reported both their employment and capital, or just employment, and regressing that on license fee. And so we went from, having data on some sizing variable for 45% of units to having a sizing variable for 99.8%, dramatically making it much more useful to users. I mean, the data collection, it's a bit of a paraphrase here. Pupia would probably tell you it took a lot longer for both times, but the bulk of the data collection was completed in 4 months compared to 8 months the previous time. And it was also much more efficient, taking a lot less time for the team to process. And lastly, just for that one example I showed previously, in the first request, we had the status, new or continuing, for just 10% of units. But after the modification, we got it for 83.9%. Not perfect, but a real dramatic improvement, really, and a good first step. And there were also improvements in other fields. There was substantial improvements in the address quality. Now that people know that we needed to be able to find these businesses so an enumerator could go there and conduct a survey. And because they understood that level of detail was needed, additional information was provided. It's just a bit hard to summarize. And lastly, just the lesson here is every country is different. The initial idea for Myanmar's request to go to local governments was correct, but due to a lack of engagement with the providers, it made it much more difficult than it needed to be. And so again, your country will not face the same problem as Myanmar did. I have never heard of another SBR attempting to try and collect data from 330 local governments. But the lesson is true from all. All of us can improve our processes. We can all better engage with our data providers, or our potential data providers in many cases. And there are also always going to be opportunities you don't know about. And this is true for every country. Even Norway and Denmark would possibly have that. I know Australia did. My most recent project with the ABS has been working on updating some old processes. But as part of that, we've been collaborating closely with the Australian Taxation Office. And as part of that collaboration, we identified $200,000 worth of data savings we're able to make each year from improved contact data that we didn't know existed and has been available to us for years, which the ATO were like, why don't you use this? And we just didn't know it existed, but they volunteered it. And so thank you all, and I'm done. Rikke, did I make time?
It was just perfect. Thank you so much, Michael, and thanks for really getting into some of the challenges that are, of course, linked to what a statistical business register needs to be, but are also extremely practical in nature. And thanks very much for sharing those lessons. And as you say, well, the lessons are true for everyone, but yeah, it just takes different shapes and sizes depending on the context we operate in. Michael, there is I'm going to throw 2 questions at you. There was a question earlier on from our friend Mahesh from Nepal, and you mentioned about time spent on the collection, but his question is, can you say something in general about the human resources that are needed for data checking and editing? And the question from Chetra from Cambodia is, how did the local government support the SBR?
Look, this is very much a country-specific issue. In Myanmar, you had a decentralized government, a federated state. So there was no centralized tax office to collect this information from. So you had to go to local government who had the authority to register local businesses. That's a fairly unique situation. I actually haven't seen it in any other country yet. So I wouldn't recommend I wouldn't expect it to be relevant to everyone in the room. I mean, a lot of these experiences you have with business register are very much country dependent. For Myanmar, the resourcing was the CSO SBR team was between 5 to 7 people, but the collection teams, they had collection officers in every state, and there's 15 states. And so you had a number of people in those states, depending on the population of that state, working on this collection for that period, calling up, following up. The local governments, of course, were ordered to provide this information, and so there was a burden on them to provide this information. As for the data cleaning, it depends. We've conducted the exercise 2 times now, and the first time it took months upon months upon months for teams of 5-7 people, as well as work with ESCAP and ADB. I can't tell you how many nights I worked with Albert and Nico and some of the consultants hired at ESCAP to help the CSO SBR time clean it. Then we'd go home and continue the hotel and keep cleaning it. It's hard to sort of put a number on that figure. And because it was an administrative data source, it was a bit smaller than, say, an economic census. So the number of records is smaller than what you would have seen in Laos's economic census and Cambodia's economic census. So in that way, it's easier to clean than that, just because there's fewer records. So it really depends on the source, I'm sorry, and the quality of the data being inputted. The equivalent work required for Australia for this is minute in comparison what is required for Myanmar, just because the quality of the input data. And Australia's administrative data isn't as high quality as Norway's, which is legendarily good. Even Australia is jealous of Norway's admin data. Sorry, did I answer that question the best I could?
Yeah, I mean, I was not looking for a specific number, so you did very well,
3.
Michael. And as you rightly say, it's so context dependent, this. And do you want to talk a little bit more about the support from local government, referring to the question from Chetra?
Yeah, so there are 330 local governments or townships in Myanmar. They're responsible for sewerage, road access, and local taxation, which they collect license fees from the businesses every year. They're technically independent, but they do work with the government authorities, and so they get a request to populate this template. And generally speaking, we found with the engagement, with the explanations, that they were willing to populate this, and you had local staff who would call and help them. How much work it required from each local government was really dependent on how many businesses was there. For very small ones with very few businesses, it was probably 2 days work because you just had 300. I will comment that for a majority of these local governments, they only maintained paper records. So there was a lot of typing. Whereas, for example, the central city of Yangon has a very modern, advanced database, and the data extract for them was very simple, very efficient, very easy, and usually it was sent within a few days of the period being over because it was a much simpler task for them. So it really depended upon the nature of the government. And once we did the engagement, the quality improved dramatically when they appreciated what we were asking for.
Okay, good. Thank you again, Michael, for an excellent presentation and for sharing what's been a very interesting experience there. I can see the questions are rolling now, still over the screen here. The next question, I'm going to not pose to you, Michael, because the next question here actually brings us very nicely into the next presentation, because we have a question here from Pakudi Pandi, asking whether the exercise was executed on an end-to-end IT platform. And our next speaker is actually from the Asian Development Bank, and that is Albert, who Michael just mentioned, because the support in Myanmar was carried out closely collaborating between the CSO in Myanmar, ADB, and ESCAP, and the IT system was really the contribution from ADB. So Michael, thank you again, and it's time now for me to properly introduce Albert Sang-Hyun. Albert is a web development consultant at the Asian Development Bank, and he is responsible for developing, implementing, and maintaining the ADB SBR system, which is a generic SBR solution developed at the Asian Development Bank. So we have a system with the same idea as what we heard from from Anne in Norway, namely to provide a generic IT solution for countries wishing to develop their SBR system. Albert not only does this at ADB, he's also supporting the ADB key indicators, one of ADB's flagship publications, which many of you may be aware of. And he's also working to develop their internal statistical databases. He has extensive experience before ADB also in data warehousing and development of other information systems. So Albert, welcome. Thank you so much for joining the Café. And the floor is yours. And we can see your slide clearly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Rike. So as Rike introduced, I'm one of the members of the ADB team responsible for building the ADB SBR system. So for this presentation, I'll be highlighting our experience and I guess the design process in developing the prototype system, highlighting the recent changes we've applied for the most current iteration of the system, which is based on the evolving requirements in the region. So just to briefly start, I guess, a brief history of the project, it started very early in 2014, 2015, and its goal was to jumpstart and advance the SBRs in the region. So this assistance is multifaceted. So we do provide assistances in, for example, discussions between NSOs and line ministries to encourage data sharing, helping the SBR teams within the NSOs to establish and formalize the process for their SBRs, and also building a community of SBR practitioners in the region. And to that end, we've conducted several workshops and in-country trainings. But one of the core deliverables for the project would be the development of the prototype system. So this is particularly important for NSOs with no viable SBR systems yet. So we wanted to develop and implement an SBR system that would be completely customized for that NSO, which would then be completely owned, operated, and controlled by that agency. So the main goal was to deliver a minimum viable SBR system. And to that end, we've kept in mind some of the points from the UN guidelines, particularly the points of having a long-term vision, and then even at the start of the project, or even at the start of the development of the platform. And then in order to achieve that, we've taken a modular development approach. And this is quite advantageous because it allows us to separate and compartmentalize the system, the features of the SBR system, and then gradually add them in by order of priority and urgency. So the first iteration of the SBR system was rolled out in 2017, 2018 with our initial set of partner NSOs. And it took the form of a web-based system. So this had the advantage of having a common database that the users would be interacting in, and it's quite conducive for collaboration. So we also tried our best to make sure that it's user-friendly. And it basically enforced a standardized process for data imports and updates, also applying variable-specific data validation rules. And even back in the first iteration, we made sure that the variables for the SBR system can be customized to accommodate whatever is needed for that particular country, right? So, but looking back now, we do realize that the initial iteration has its limitations and constraints, in particular because we were heavily focused on working with economic census data. So, for example, we had a file-based import mechanism, and since we're expecting that data will come in every 5 years if it's economic census-based, then that file-based import mechanism served that purpose well enough. But for example, as we move to integrating admin data, where data comes in much more frequently, that proved to be quite a limiting factor. And also the initial workflow that we've devised for the system, while it's structured, it began to feel a bit constraining. So taking those observations into account, as well as more recent discussions with our partners since then. So we've noticed and taken into account the evolving requirements in the region. So one of which would be the shift towards the use of admin data. And this is reflected in a number of partners that we have. And then instead of doing this data import mechanism on a file-based data sharing basis, we've noticed that there are countries who are looking into direct system-to-system integration using APIs, which brings us to the current iteration of the ADB SBR system. So again, these are enhancements. We've added in enhancements based on those most recent requirements, as well as it provided an opportunity for us to rethink some of the assumptions that we've made for the first iteration. So I'll go over a few key modules of the system and then highlight the changes that we've made to make sure that it's extensible and customizable for the NSOs. So for variables, this one can be configured or customized based on what's available locally. So depending on what the NSO needs or what the data source provides, the SBR can be configured to accommodate those variables. And bulk of this work would be done during the initial setup. But we've also recently added in a functionality to add or hide variables later on as needed by the NSO. So this applies to classification systems as well. So each country would have their own geographic classification, would have their own economic activity classification. And we've also noticed that some countries require or want to add classification systems later on, so even after the initial setup. So this is accommodated as well in the updated SBR system. And then in order to more flexibly conform to the workflow of that particular NSO, we've provided more granular controls for user management. So basically, each module and each feature of the system can be toggled on and off for certain users. So this way you could create sets of users who are responsible for, let's say, just viewing the records, another set of users for editing them, another set of users for updating or approving those records. And then we couple this with a feature to control the visibility of records to certain users. So we can filter out the records that a user can see based on the geographic code or the industry code. So in one of our partners have deployed their SBRs across different offices. So basically they want to have the district office be responsible for the records within their area. And then the regional offices would also be able to see the records for their particular region. And then the central office would see all the records at the national level. So in addition to that filtering visibility feature, we're also putting in a mechanism to hide or show sets of variables to specific users. So another key consideration that we've put in on the SBR system would be its support for multiple languages. So every visible part of the system is translatable. And this applies to the names of the variables themselves and even the entries for the classification systems. So that when you switch classifications, you'll be able to see the descriptions. When you switch languages, you'll be able to see the descriptions in the appropriate languages as well. So the translations themselves can be edited and updated conveniently. Okay. So I've touched upon this earlier, but for this current iteration, we're emphasizing on the use of APIs to let the administrative data source and the SBR to talk on a system-to-system level. So this provides a bit more robustness and convenience when doing data transfers. So we've built in the base logic of importing records into the SBR system via APIs. And then to handle the specifics of the data sources or the differences in API specifications or file formats, we've provided in provisions to have data adapters. So these are basically just small pieces of code meant to handle or meant to describe the intricacies of a certain format and make it compliant with the core import process that the SBR already has. So last part would be, this is not a module, more of a methodology that we've been applying. So basically, test-driven development means we're writing automated tests to verify that the system is working as intended. So this means that it's additional work, but it's necessary to maintain the quality of the system, even as we continually develop and iterate on it. So I guess that wraps up the key modules that I wanted to discuss. And then for our current partners, we're working closely with these partners for this iteration of the SBR system. And then they're at varying stages of completion, and Uzbekistan, the SBR for Uzbekistan is scheduled to be deployed before the end of the year. And then to wrap things up, just a few key takeaways. So the ADB SBR platform is continually being improved on. So based on our discussions with the NSOs, based on webinars such as this, where we get a chance to talk to other SBR practitioners. And it's very valuable because it reveals the commonalities and differences in establishing SBRs. So for the commonalities, we can take those and make the corresponding feature in the SBR more robust. And then for the differences, we take those in and then account for them by providing provisions for customizations and extensibility. And last point would be, ultimately, although I've heavily focused on the SBR system for this presentation, it's just one component. And even for us, and I'm sure many of the panelists would echo this, the number one priority is securing the data source, and then the system, the technology would just follow. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert, for presenting this solution. And I like your last point as well. It, of course, what ultimately matters is what we put into the animal. There has to be a certain quality there, and having IT solutions supporting is really what they are good at and should be focused on. Albert, I don't have a specific question to you, so I'm going to throw one at you, which I think several of the listeners might have in the back of their mind as well, because we've heard now two SBR solutions, both from Anne and from you. So are you in a position to highlight a few differences between these solutions, or maybe talk a little bit about whether you are working together with Stats Norway or have any plans for doing so? And I'll promise Anne, who's still here in the audience, that I'll throw the same question to her afterwards.
So we've recently, we've reached out to Anne just before this webinar. So we were able to just briefly talk about our approaches on the SBR system. And one of the things that we noticed about the differences in approach would be the customizability in terms of variables and classification systems. So again, her inputs on this is very valuable to us as well. But this particular feature for us, is a response to what we've gathered as well from our NSOs, from our partners. So so basically we're not prescribing anything or labeling an approach, either approach as correct or not incorrect. I guess it's just a reflection of what we see on the ground and what our partners are asking for the SBR system.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Albert, for an excellent presentation. And I'll just check now if Anne is listening in and may want to add a few comments on what Albert just mentioned in terms of the complementarity, differences, etc. Between these two solutions. Anne, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree very much with Albert. It is a fundamental difference that we decided it's not possible to add variable or classification while he did the opposite. I am still not sure whether it was the right choice, but I have had countries where one country, they wanted to have a special variable for schools to know whether it was a boarding school or a day school. And another country, they wanted a special variable for hotels, how many beds. And they are very insisting. And a third country, they wanted, in addition to legal form, they wanted a separate classification that was very, very non-standard that I've never seen, but it was kind of a mix of legal form and sector code. So basically, making it possible to add variables and classifications as you want, you might end up with a very messy, unusable system. So yeah, that being said, I am a kind of, I wish I had gender-based employees, and I wish I had this and this, but hopefully we will develop it, have resources to make a version 2, version 3, and listen to our users to add the most important variables.
Okay, thanks, and thanks, Albert. I mean, pros and cons as always, and I think the most important thing here is that we have forums like today where the users can actually listen in to some of these questions, and it's now the time of our Stats Cafe today where we will hear from one of the potential users, and that is the last speaker for today. Miss Salika Chantalalong, and she's from the Lao Statistics Bureau. Salika, I'm just checking. Salika, are you with us? Oh, there you are. Good, yes, good. Wonderful to see you. And Salika is another long-term good friend of statistics in ESCAP and Asia Pacific in general. Salika is the Deputy DG of Lao Statistics Bureau. She's the head of the Economic Statistics Department, and Salika has outstanding in-depth expertise on economic statistics and is also a great supporter of accounting, both environmental and economic accounting. And Salika is one of the people who believe very strongly in regional and global collaboration to strengthen statistics development. So Salika, it's great to have you with us today. And I look forward to hearing a few reflections from you from what we've heard from our presenters today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ricky, for having me today. My honor is to be here and give some view, especially from Lao Statistics Bureau. After 4 presentation, I actually would like to thank you on 4 presentations that very good job, and then quite reflect on the very importance on SBR that we are now being aware amongst statistic family. So actually, I agree with all presenters that the business, which is the statistic, is now is highly increasing demand, particularly to report to governments that what is the
Salika, you are falling out. Your connection is not so good.
Oh, okay. So
could you
could
you try to switch off your camera?
Okay, sure. I switch off now. Okay, better or still?
Yes, much better. Okay. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay, yes. So in conduct in conducting or compilation of SBR, I agree with many presenters that many countries try to compile SBR, and the most what they call the most applicable way is to use IT solutions like Miss Anne from Norway said that she also developed some tool to compile SBR, and ADB also present on their application on SBR compilation. And actually, I agree with Michael's that compiling SBR is not like few years work. It's actually long-term process, particularly to most of the time is for data editing and cleaning. That is the worst period and nightmare for on statistics. And another point I would like to make a remarkable of cooperation between on donors, actually as ESCAP or ADB that support to the region, particularly to develop SBR. Actually, in Laos, we start seeing 2014. Actually, I also the one to start with ADB. We working from question mark, what is SBR? And until now, we know what it is and how to compile. And even those that is still hard to work because it's not only our own data. We have to work with others. As Michael mentioned, as Mr. Carsten mentioned, that we use a lot of administrative data, and actually it's not the available data that we already collect. It's actually new data that we had to expand the compilation from other line ministry. And then and it's not just small data, it's compiled quite huge of database. And the most critical problem is how to link database from our own data from Statistical Bureau with another ministry. So this is the critical part that we have issue, particularly maybe Anne already mentioned, and on ID, and also Michael mentioned on how to link. So I think this is the most critical problem on SBR. So apart from that, I also would like to mention that one part or the other issue, I agree with other participants make question how to make government aware on that. Actually, we LSB or on of the Statistical Bureau aware that SBR very important, but how the government or the government or who will support us will understand that how it's important. That's very quite a problem, and to make sure we get collaboration from line ministry also the quite an issue as well. But once you compile SBR again, there are more demand from other user. Can we add one variable more, as we discussed before? Like, can we add one variable more on this and that, and then it start to have quite a problem for us to compile as SBR. So we have to actually tell the user maybe SBR is only to make a frame. If you want more information, maybe we compile another thing. So this is also another issue that we need to aware and make the user understand on the SBR compilation. I think this is on the issue that I summarized from our discussion, and then I think hopefully we can discuss more. And thank you again, ESCAP, to organize this cafe. I think is very important on SBR. Actually, just in time for Laos Statistical Bureau, because we finished economic census, as Michael mentioned. Now we are working with ADB to compile the to develop our SBR, to continue develop them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Salika. And as you mentioned, you are in the perfect spot timing-wise to really move on statistics business register development with the census well underway. So good luck with the efforts in Lao going forward, and thank you so much for your reflections. We are actually heading into the last minute of this Stats Cafe, but I want to just pick up on two of the points by Salika, and I'm going to throw two questions at the two speakers I haven't reverted to with questions yet, and that is Carsten and Michael. And Carsten, there was a comment earlier made from Salika that she wanted to ask whether any countries have actually replaced economic census with statistical business registers, and you did hint in your presentation of some experiences from Europe with administrative data actually totally taking over. So if you could reflect a little bit on that, and then the very final question I'll pose to Michael, and that is a point made by Salika, but also reflected in a question from Mahesh, and that is that relates to this issue of how to actually link unique IDs in statistical business registers when you import data from multiple data sources. Carsten, are you still with us? Can you spend 1 minute just reflecting on the need for economic censuses in countries where you have a totally different administrative data landscape compared with some of the countries we've just heard from? Carsten, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in Europe, several countries have skipped their economic censuses. I mean, years back, it was the main source probably for the business registers, but it's very costly. It's very costly. So if you have good administrative data sources, if you have a unique identifier that you can use to link information from different administrative sources, then you have the possibility. This is very often not the case, of course, but this is a very good investment to try to develop these, and you have to do that in cooperation with data owners, with ministries, and so on and so forth. Maybe you can, I mean, it came up earlier. Also, I mean, how can you get support when you go to the management or the chief statisticians to allocate resources to it? I mean, maybe try to get support also from some of the substantive statistical areas. But I mean, eventually they will get better data for their frames, for example, for the CPI, for the PPI, or for the national accounts. I mean, it came up earlier also about the informal economy. Of course, this is super difficult to address, but it should be in your national account. It should be in your GDP, whether it's informal or not. It should be included in your GDP because it's within the so-called national accounts production boundary. And so you can produce and provide a much better service to many other economic statistics. And this is maybe one way to try to get some support when we ask for additional resources. But yes, with economic census, they are costly, and many countries in Europe have left them, and some have today only use administrative sources to populate their business registers.
Okay, thank you very much. So definitely something to aim for there, but a long road for some. Michael.
Thank you, Rikke.
Unique ID, multiple business, multiple data sources. Go ahead.
You love to throw the easy questions to me, don't you? The short answer is very hard. The longer answer is it's complicated. You can be very lucky and live in a Norway or Australia and have a unique standardized ID like Australia has with the Australian business number, which every business must have, and therefore use that commonly shared unique ID to link all data sources, and your life is very easy. For most of the rest of the world, it's a bit more complicated. For Myanmar, the decision was made to avoid multiple data sources because the ability to integrate them was too difficult in the short term. The next planned stage of investigation was to identify places where there wasn't overlap So the fact that we couldn't link businesses didn't make a critical issue. In other situations, you've got the option of profiling, where you engage with these businesses and actually identify them and then maintain linking keys. That occurs in Australia to a certain extent in a more complicated way for profiling, and it is an incredibly labor-intensive task with 25 dedicated staff full-time since the 1980s, I will add. So that's a lot of money you can spend over 40 years. And a lot of that data from the 1980s is still being used today. Because it's really, when you think of linking unique IDs, it's all about the administrative data source and not much about your side. It's about working with the administrative data, the unique and the admin data they have there. A lot of countries who've moved from an economic census to a business register or an SBR and stopped conducting economic censuses have done so only when the Statistics Office has collaborated with the National Tax Office or the National Business Registration authorities to actually have the statistical requirements introduced into the registration and admin data processes. I mean, the Norwegians can talk at great length about what they've achieved, but it is very hard and often involves a real cost-benefit trade-off. And as Salika said, can take years. For most of the times I've been asked and the problems I've looked at in detail, what was being asked was just not possible without an excessive commitment of resources is my short answer.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That was maybe not what I would call a short answer, but it was very elaborative and very useful. Thank you so much for those reflections. And I see several people have added some reflections on this particular issue also in the chat box. So thanks, Michael. And I do see my good colleague from ESCAP Statistical Institute in Japan has very patiently had her hand up for a while. Pinar, can you promise to be very short? Then we'll just squeeze your question in as the last one in this Stats Cafe. You on mute, Pinar.
Sorry, I spent my time by talking to myself. Thank you very much for organizing this Stats Cafe. Wonderful presentations. I just would like to inform you about an upcoming course on Statistical Business Register. We will launch the course in August and then we will keep you informed. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's wonderful, Pinar. And I should actually have mentioned that in my introduction. But thank you so much for raising your hand so everyone is aware. And it's clear from the very active chat during this session that there is a lot of interest in this. So thank you very much, Pinar.
Thank you.
I want to also just thank all our speakers for today. Your presentations and reflections were excellent. I want to thank our very, very active audience for all your good questions. There's quite a few questions and comments I didn't manage to pick up because time is always an issue. Several of those relate to these two SBR solutions we heard from Anne and from Albert. And I just want to tell both Albert and Anne that you're welcome to type in your answers to those questions in the meeting chat. That meeting chat will be active also after we close the cafe in half a minute from now. So please don't be shy, just typing in your answers. Several are asking whether they can get access to the software, whether the software is accompanied with training, etc. So please do go ahead and answer in there. And also, if anyone would like to have more bilateral exchange with some of the experts who've been presenting today, you are welcome to contact ESCAP Statistics Division and we'll be happy to facilitate. We are just a little reluctant for posting people's emails in public forums like this, but feel free to write to me or my team if you want to have any further exchanges. We also have ideas of further stats cafes or forums of exchange, both on SBR country experiences. Thank you very much to Udaya from Sri Lanka suggesting that. We have suggestion on doing something similar on CPI from Cambodia. Thanks to Chetra for mentioning that. So I think we have meat to continue this series of cafes for some years to come. Finally, in addition to thanking you for your excellent presentations and inputs, I want to also extend warm thanks to my own team, Alec and Ing, Nalin Root, who've been pulling it all together for today. So thank you very much, and do have a good day, a good evening, and I hope to see many of you in the next cafe. Yeah. So bye-bye from here, and thank you very much.